In this video, we're going to look at graphing our trig functions. We're going to do this with the knowledge that we have already on our unit circle. So we've looked at a triangle like this in our unit circle in class, where we've then defined sine to be our y-coordinate on the unit circle, and we've defined cos to be our x-coordinate on the unit circle. And we've also talked about how we can define tan as a ratio of sine over cos. Therefore, tan is a ratio of the y-coordinate over the x-coordinate on the unit circle. Okay, so we'll look at our sine graph first. So what we know about sine in the unit circle already is the quadrants that it's positive and the quadrants that it's negative. So our angles always start from this point here. So saying that sine is our y-coordinate, therefore our y value here is going to be 0 because we haven't left the x-axis yet. So starting from 0, and we know we're going to be positive. So here we go, our sine's going up. We know that when we get to this point, our sine value is 1. So we hit 1 up here. We know that sine is still positive in this quadrant. So as we move down, it's moving closer and closer down to 0 until we hit our 0. Then we know in the third and fourth quadrant we are negative. Therefore our graph does a similar curve where it's heading to now -1. So now we're approaching 0 again as we head into the fourth quadrant. So this graph is only showing us from 0 to 360, but as we move around this circle, our graph is going to be repeating. So we're going to get a nice smooth wave. Alright, we'll have a look at our cosine graph as well. So cosine, we know, is our x-coordinate. So here our x-coordinate starts over here. Again, our angle starts here, and we know our x-coordinate here is 1 because our unit circle has a radius of 1. So therefore our graph is going to be starting up here. And we know that cosine is positive in our first quadrant, but it's heading closer and closer to 0 as we reach 90 degrees. And then we know we're negative in our second quadrant. So here our sine graph is, let's make that smoother, is now negative in this quadrant. And we know we're negative in our third quadrant as well, so we're still going to be negative, but we're heading closer and closer to 0 again now. And then as we head into the fourth quadrant, we are now positive and heading back to our point of being at 1. And then again, our values, as we go around, our graph is just going to keep repeating, and it's going to look just like this. Alright, so how might we think our tangent graph is going to look? So again, our angle is going to start here. We know that tan is positive in our first quadrant and our third quadrant. So we know from 0 to 90 degrees we're going to have a positive looking graph. So knowing here that sine is 0 and cos is 1, we're going to have a ratio here of 0 over 1. Right, so that's just going to give us 0. So our point's going to be starting at 0. And here we go. So our graph is looking like that. So we know that when we get to 1 here, we've got our sine value is 1, but our x-coordinate now is 0. So we're going to have a ratio of 1 over 0. Therefore, we say here that tan is undefined because any quotient with 0 in our denominator is undefined. So our graph kind of stops here, and you'll see it in a second. It's going to appear obviously in a negative value because we're heading into our second quadrant. And so there it is. So again, we're approaching 0 as we approach our 180 degrees. And we're now going to be positive as we enter our third quadrant. So there's our tan graph. And again, it's going to be undefined when we get to this point down here, because now we're going to have -1 over 0, which is still undefined. And then we know that tan is going to be negative in this quadrant. So here it comes up here. And again, as we keep heading around this quadrant, so angles larger than 360 or in the negative direction as well, our graph is going to keep repeating itself. So there are our three main trig graphs. So what about our reciprocal functions? So we'll have a quick look at those as well. So here we have cosec, which you know is our inverse for sine. So this is what our sine graph looks like. So it's kept repeating itself, where we've got from negative 900 all the way up to positive 800 here. But as we see, our sine, as our point on our sine graph is going to move, we can see what our cosec graph is going to look like. So knowing that it's the reciprocal of this, ultimately going to be doing the flip version of what our sine graph does. So here is in red. See how it's doing pretty much the exact opposite, and it pops up down the bottom. Should move it up a bit. And here it goes. And it keeps doing this obviously on repeat as well, as our sine graph just keeps repeating. So we'll have a look at our secant as well. So here is our cosine graph. So our secant is going to be doing the opposite. I should clear trace and fix that up again. So our secant is going to again be doing the flip version of our cosine graph, and it's going to just keep repeating. And looking at our cotangent graph, which is, so here's our tan graph here. So again, it's going to be doing almost a flip version of our tangent graph. So that gives you a general idea of what our 6 trig graphs are going to look like. I'll do another video on how we might graph these up from coordinates that we have, but that at least gives you a general idea of what your graphs are going to look like.